if you think back to the three rebellions idea, each of the rebellions has a cost. Okay, in some cases more than one. And with respect to the first one, we have the figure in the garden, the supernatural rebel, who will become known eventually as Satan and the devil, and a bunch of other titles as well. That because of his rebellion, we have death. We didn't have death before, so Eden is no more. Eden is ruined. We don't have everlasting life with God anymore, so we have estrangement from God and death. Now, because of that, in the Hebrew Bible, you do not have this figure referred to specifically as it relates to the events of Genesis 3. But what you do have is you have in so many places, both the evidence of the outcome of his rebellion, and also you have anti-Eden. What I mean by that is opposite Eden imaging to remind people of the ruination of Eden. That's kind of a convoluted way to start here, but I mention that for a specific reason. It's a fact that in Genesis 3 we have the serpent. Okay, the serpent is never called Satan in Genesis 3. The serpent is actually never called Satan anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. The serpent is only called Satan in the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the New Testament. So, critics, critical scholars, again, those who either don't have any theological sensitivity or frankly just love to destroy people's faith. They're not necessarily the same person there. They love to point this out and say things like, the Bible doesn't really know of a figure called Satan until the last book, and this isn't there's no relationship here to Genesis 3, and a lot of this Satan stuff is made up and blah, 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 blah. They try to create contradictions between the two testaments. And I reject that, not surprisingly, acknowledging that we don't have a devil figure that goes by the term Satan, the title Satan, in the Old Testament. I'm well aware of that. You might think, well, what about Job 1 and 2? Okay. In Job 1 and 2, you have the Hebrew noun Satan. Hebrew is like English. English does not tolerate the definite article, the word the, in front of a proper personal name. The language doesn't include that in its rules, and neither does English. So I'm not the Mike. My wife is not the Darina. It sounds stupid. I say the exception to this is Donald Trump. He gets to be the Donald, okay? But his wife called him the Donald, But ordinarily this is not what you see going on. So if the definite article in Job 1 and 2 precedes the word Satan, that tells you it's not a proper personal name. And so Job 1:6, we have here the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, okay, stood before the Lord, and there came also among them you look at the lower left-hand corner, it has article, the. It's a definite article appended to the noun Satan. Every occurrence of Satan in Job 1 and 2, Zechariah 3, has the definite article. That means this is not Satan proper name. It means it should be translated, ESV has a note here, the accuser, or the adversary, or the opponent, or the challenger. I mean, there's any number of ways you could render this. And in Job 1 and 2, what's going on, this is not the devil. This is not, again, the villain of Genesis 3. This is a member of the heavenly court who's actually doing his job in Job chapter 1, because they have this meeting, divine council meeting, and this figure comes in, and God asks, the Lord said to Hasatan, to the adversary or the accuser, hey, where'd you come from? And the accuser answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it. And we know from this language elsewhere that basically his job, and this is actually part of a wider subject, a wider motif that if you can Google this, Google nakedbiblepodcast.com, put in heavenly books or book of life. This is part of a bigger complex of ideas where members of the heavenly host watch people and record what they do and what happens to them. We're used to the book of life, but there's actually half a dozen different books, heavenly books, mentioned in the Bible. Just the book of life gets all the press because everybody reads the book of Revelation. Okay. So this is actually one of these agents that looks throughout the earth to see who is obeying God and who is not. And the reason he does that isn't because God has Alzheimer's, okay? It's not that God has a bad memory. It's so that on the day of judgment, you have no complaint, dude. We have a complete record of your life. Okay, we know if if you've embraced the Messiah or not. We know everything about you. It's a matter of record. It's a very ancient idea that you find in other cultures in the Hebrew Bible. So the Satan, the accuser, is the one that when he sees someone out of step or out of line, he reports. This is what he's doing in Job 1. And specifically in the context, God's like, hey, have you checked out Job? That guy's awesome. He's blameless. And what does the Satan, the adversary, say? Yeah, I've seen him. And here's where he crosses the line. Here's where he moves from reporting to essentially challenging God's own integrity. He says, yeah, I've seen Job, but if you took away all he had, if you allowed him to be harmed, he would curse you to your face. So it's a challenge. Now, God could, and I love to reference the movie Time Bandits here, but it doesn't usually work because it dates me and a lot of people haven't seen the movie, but it's one of these British comedies. John Cleese is in it. That's probably all you need to know from Monty Python. But part of the backdrop to this story is it's this cosmic good and evil thing going on. And the bad guy is the Satan figure, okay? And he's called the evil one. And of course he has henchmen working for him that are complete idiots. So they have a council meeting in the movie, and the evil one has been holed up in this fortress by the creator, and he can't get out. But he thinks that he's the cat's meat. He thinks he's awesome, just the big ego. And he starts going on about how great he is and how powerful he is. And then one of his henchmen says, well, if that's the case, why haven't you been able to escape from this fortress? And the evil one says, what did you say? I said, why haven't you been able to escape from this? And he just reaches out and blows him to bits. And you get a good laugh at it because it's one of these comedies. So God could do that, could he not? He could tell the adversary, what did you say? You're challenging my omniscience and the accuracy of my assessment of Job. He could just blow him up and say, don't ever talk to me like that again. That's the line in the movie. After he blows him up, don't ever talk to me like that again. But if he does that, guess what? The question is still on the table. The question is unanswered. So everybody else in the divine council, if he blows the adversary to bits, they're wondering, okay, the adversary's gone now, but God never really answered the question. God never really did anything to inform us otherwise. Maybe the Satan was right about Job, and God isn't. So God doesn't blow up the adversary. What he does is he says, okay, you're allowed to do anything you want to Job. Except you're not allowed to take his life, because I don't want, I'm reading between the lines here, but if he allows Job to die, if he allows the Satan, the adversary, to take his life, then God already knows what's going to happen. He's going to come back and say, oh yeah, Job would have buckled if he would have survived, but I accidentally killed him, So, I still think that Job would curse you. No, we're not doing that. You are not allowed to take his life. You can do anything else you want. And we'll see who's right. The court will see, the council will see who's correct. And none of that. And that's the way the book plays out. You, as the reader, you know the backdrop of Job, the first two chapters. Job doesn't know any of this is going on. So the book is about why the righteous suffer. And sometimes the answer is you're never going to know. But you have to trust God, that God, it's happening for a reason. The reason may not be made known to you. It may be. I mean, at the end of the book of Job, what Job loses is restored and all that sort of thing. I mean, we know the story. But none of that has anything to do with Genesis 3. Now, if you go into Second Temple Judaism, though, and by the time you get to the New Testament, the original rebel is perceived as the arch ruler of everything. He's the God of this world, to quote Paul in 2 Corinthians 4. He's the ruler of the prince of the power of the air, and all these titles, these lofty titles. So the question is, how does this guy get preeminence, and why? I go into a lot of the details here in the Demons book, but the short answer is the reason he gets preeminence is really there's a couple of reasons that emerge from, again, some of these other texts. It's just these texts are useful even if they're not in the Bible, because they tell you how readers of the Bible were processing these kinds of questions, and what passages in the Hebrew Bible they were looking at to process the questions the way they did. So it's very useful. It's like reading a commentary in some sense. And so the answer that you get is he gets street cred from being the first. That's a big deal. He's the first one to have the, quote unquote, courage to challenge God and oppose what God wants to do. But the real reason he gets preeminence is because all of the other ones know, the principalities and powers know that, we can do what we want here to these people. We can abuse them all day long. We can have them destroy themselves. But at the end of the day, everything dies. They all die, which means they all go to the realm of the dead where this guy is king. Because in the garden story, the rebel is cast down to the ground. Okay, in one or it's actually more than one of the texts, the term is eretz, which is the normal term for earth, but eretz is also one of the terms for the underworld. This is why we have an underworld. This is why we have a realm of the dead, because this one, through his rebellion and deceiving the humans and their rebellion, now we have death. We have a place that when people, now they're going to die for the first time, and they go to a place. They don't cease to exist in terms of their spirits, so they go to the new realm of the dead, and guess who runs the show there? It's this guy, because he's cast down not only to the eretz, to the underworld, but if you look at the curse, and I read the curse metaphorically of the serpent in the garden, he wanted to be in charge. He wants to be the one that makes the rules. He wants to oppose God's plan. He has a better idea. Well, in the curse, he is actually put beneath the hooves of the animals. He's not only cast down to the ground, he's like under them. So he wants to be at the highest level. Now you're at the lowest level. So deal with it. This is your domain now. And yes, you are the God of this world, because now everything dies. Everything is going to wind up at your house on your doorstep. And so the other ones know that at the end of the day, this one has ultimate authority because everything will die. And so that's why he emerges as the one who is perceived as causing the most harm and whose rebellion has the greatest reach. He therefore has the most authority over the world of men, over the world of humans, because now they all die. So that in a nutshell is the relationship of the Genesis 3 thing to the sort of cosmic hierarchy. But it actually doesn't have anything to do specifically with Job 1 and 2. Now let's go back there. This is sort of like the Elohim discussion. We have been taught, for some reason, it's just tradition, that somehow we get unnerved by the thought that we don't have the devil in Job 1 and 2 because we've always been taught that. And we get unnerved by the observation that's very simple to confirm. Just do your own, look it up yourself in your own Bible. The serpent is never called Satan. Okay. Well, that must mean there's a contradiction. No, you know what it means? It means that biblical writers are under no obligation to use the same words to describe the same guy. where's the cosmic rule that says every time we talk about anti-Eden or the undoing of Eden or death that we have to use the word Satan or the word serpent? Who made up that rule? Why is it that we have to use the same vocabulary in all these passages? Why is there a cosmic rule that says we can't come up with other terms to refer to the same rebel over the course of time that fit, that aptly describe him? This is actually what you see in the Second Temple period texts. The rebel of Eden, Genesis 3, the supernatural one, gets called a number of things in between the testaments. He does get called Satan there. It starts to be used as a proper name. This is when we have the transition outside the Hebrew Bible. But then it takes the form of mastema. Again, I'm not going to bore you with Hebrew noun formation. I mean, that would put you out, okay? But you take, Satan, which is a related word to Satan, to oppose. When you want to make it a noun, you put an M in front of it. So we have mastema. Okay, that becomes a title in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's used. Belial, the worthless one. That's not an Old Testament term. We can't call the rebel of Genesis 3 Belial because there's a cosmic rule that says we can only use the word Satan. Really? Why? Again, there is no rule like that. So we have mastema, we have Belial. Beliar is a derivative. We have Beelzebul, which is actually a really interesting one. Beelzebul is Canaanite. Beel is Baal. Zebul is the word for prince. Okay, Baal becomes sort of a primary source figure for Satan imagery. Why? Because Baal is lord of the dead in Canaanite religion. He also thinks he's the ruler of the nations. Prince Baal. I mean, the Gospels refer to the devil, to Satan, as Beelzebul. This is why. Okay? So you get a number of these things. Diabolos, devil, the deceiver, the liar, the slanderer, more literally. Okay, all of these terms fit. If the shoe fits, let's let him wear them. And Satan in Greek doesn't have the rule about the definite article. You can have ha, like ha Jesus. It's not the Jesus, it's just Jesus. Right? Greek tolerates a definite article in front of a proper personal name. Hebrew does not, just like English. Languages are different. So by the time you get into the Greek-speaking world, which is in between the Testaments, the Hellenistic period, I hate to bring up history of Civ because you all wanted to forget that in high school as soon as you had it. But the Hellenistic era is a big deal. The world becomes Greek-speaking. And with that, the language has more elasticity. And so Satanas can become a proper personal name in a Greek-speaking world, and it does. And since the New Testament's written in Greek, they use that. This is all you have. You don't have a contradiction between the Testaments. You have a supernatural rebel in Genesis 3 that brings the ruination of Eden and death and estrangement from God. And over time, he gets called lots of things. They're all appropriate. That's it. But again, if I was a religion teacher at a typical undergraduate institution and I have a bunch of Christians in my Religion 101 class, oh, I can't wait to talk about this. Because I'm going to, in 60 minutes, I'm going to have you thinking your Bible is ridiculous and full of contradictions. I'm going to give you textual dilemmas like this, and I'm not going to unpack them for you at all because I want to destroy your faith. This is easy. It's easy. And I not every, don't get the impression that every professor of religion or biblical studies that isn't a Christian is like this. They're not. Most of them are apathetic toward issues of faith. I mean, they're not there to intentionally harm people, but there are some that are. They live for it, okay? I have met them. They're out there. And the solution to this, again, is to teach people, especially, high school and stuff like this, to get them ready for these kinds of things that they're going to have in their religion class. Because what a coincidence, they're forced to take this class. Oh, who would have thought that, Well, again, there's an agenda here. So I probably got a little far afield with that, but there is a role for that, and there is a logic as to why this one gets elevated, um, in terms of the understanding that you get in the New Testament, but it's not directly linked to the scene in Job 1 and 2.